There is a moment, and you feel it in your bones before you can name it, when the news stops being something that happens to other people and starts happening to you. It hits you at the gas pump when the number on the screen keeps climbing past $4 a gallon and you feel your stomach drop. It hits you at the grocery store when the eggs and the bread and the ground beef that used to be affordable now feel like a negotiation. It hits you when you open your 401k and the chart looks like a roller coaster designed by someone who hates you. That moment is right now. That moment is March 2026. And the reason it feels different this time, the reason your uncle at Thanksgiving and your roommate on TikTok and the Wall Street analyst on CNBC are all talking about the same thing, is because the United States is at war with Iran. This conflict was initiated by the United States and Israel on February 28, 2026, and has embroiled the entire Middle East region. But to call it simply a war in the Middle East is to miss the point entirely. This is a war that is being waged on two fronts simultaneously, one in the skies above Tehran and the Persian Gulf, and the other in the living rooms and bank accounts of ordinary Americans who never asked for it. Let me tell you how we got here, because the backstory is what makes this tragedy unbearable. The 2025 to 2026 Iranian protests were a series of nationwide demonstrations that began in late December 2025 amid a deepening economic crisis following a sharp depreciation of the Iranian rial, rising inflation, and widespread shortages. The unrest became the largest uprising in Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, spreading to more than 200 cities. The Iranian government responded with massacres of protesters, with the deadliest incidents occurring on January 8th to 10th, 2026. On January 2nd, Trump threatened a locked and loaded military intervention if the government killed peaceful protesters. On January 13th, he expressed support for Iranian anti-government protesters and pledged that help is on the way, and later announced that a U.S. armada was heading to the Middle East. And yet, even as the warships were sailing, diplomacy was alive. On February 6, 2026, Iran and the U.S. held indirect nuclear negotiations in Oman's capital, Muscat. Just before the strikes began on February 27th, Oman's foreign minister said a breakthrough had been reached. Iran had agreed both to never stockpile enriched uranium and to full verification by the IAEA, and furthermore had agreed to irreversibly downgrade its enriched uranium. Peace was within reach. Talks were expected to resume on March 2nd. They never resumed. The surprise U.S. Israeli attack, launched during the nuclear negotiations, killed Khamenei, other Iranian officials, and civilians. Subsequent attacks damaged military bases, government facilities, schools, hospitals, and cultural heritage sites. In retaliation, Iran launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at targets in Israel and at U.S. military bases across the region. That was 28 days ago, and the world has not been the same since. As of day 28, U.S. and Israeli forces have continued their bombardment of Iranian cities, with more than 1,900 people killed in Iran so far. Israeli strikes on Lebanon have killed 1,116 people and injured 3,229 others since March 2nd. At least 10 U.S. service members were injured in an Iranian attack on Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. with at least 2 suffering shrapnel wounds. The Houthis joined the war on March 28, conducting a ballistic missile attack toward Israel. The conflict has also seen the resumption of hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. The war is not winding down, it is metastasizing. Now, let's talk about your wallet, because this is where the war becomes inescapable for every middle-class family in America. The head of the International Energy Agency described the situation caused by the war as the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Oil prices are up more than 40% compared with before the strikes on February 28th, prompting numerous countries to implement fuel rationing and other energy conservation measures. The crisis has led to a near halt in tanker movements through the Strait of Hormuz, with nearly 20 million barrels per day of crude and product exports currently disrupted and limited alternative options to bypass the world's most critical oil transit choke point. Producers and consumers globally are feeling the strain. What does that mean at the pump? Since the start of the war, gas prices across the United States have risen sharply. The average price has climbed from just under $3 per gallon in late February to about $3.89 as of March 19th, an increase of roughly 90 cents overall. Most states have seen prices rise by more than 70 cents per gallon, with at least 11 states recording increases above $1. Some of the largest jumps are concentrated in parts of the South and West, including Arizona at $1.17 more, Kentucky at $1.07 more, and Utah at $1.04 more. Diesel, which powers trucks, boats, and trains that transport U.S. goods, has risen more quickly than regular gasoline, in part because diesel was already in short supply before the war began. And it's not just gas. Heating bills may be getting more expensive as the price of residential heating oil has begun to climb in response to the war. And it could get far worse. Macquarie Group warned that oil may hit a record $200 a barrel if the Iran war drags on till June, with the Strait of Hormuz staying shut. If that happens, U.S. gasoline could reach roughly $7 per gallon. $7. Let that sink in. And the food on your table? Nitrogen fertilizer prices could roughly double from 2024 levels, while phosphate prices might increase by approximately 50%. Analysts warn that supply constraints coinciding with the Northern Hemisphere's spring planting season could lead to decreased usage, lowering yields for staple crops such as wheat, rice, and maize. That means your cereal, your bread, your chicken, everything that depends on grain, is about to get more expensive. Not hypothetically, not eventually. Now, the housing market? The 10-year bond yield jumped to 4.46% on March 27th, its highest level since July 2025. The 30-year mortgage rate climbed to 6.38% on March 26th. With uncertainty from the war in Iran and the weakening job market causing higher mortgage rates, potential home buyers are being squeezed further. If you are a young couple saving for your first house, this war just moved the goalpost another 100 yards. The stock market has been a wrecking ball. Stock markets experienced declines globally, with the Dow Jones falling by over 400 points and the S&P 500 dropping 0.7% on March 2nd. Global crude oil prices have been volatile this month, swinging as much as $35 in a single day. The uncertainty is the cruelest part. Investors have eagerly awaited a ceasefire in the Middle East, but once again, there are mixed messages from the U.S. and Iran, leaving markets confused and directionless. With over 3,000 vessels stranded in the Middle East, according to the International Maritime Organization, the Persian Gulf has become a massive parking lot for ships. An estimated 20,000 seafarers are stranded in the region, caught in the crossfire. Global trade is choking, and when global trade chokes, you feel it at every checkout counter in America. Now, let me talk to the younger generation, the ones who are not just watching this war unfold, but feeling it in a way that their parents and grandparents may not fully understand. Amid tensions between Iran, Israel, and the United States, Gen Z is confronting the idea of war with a critical eye shaped by digital media, historical awareness, and the growing rejection of Western imperial narratives. Beyond growing up in the shadow of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, they are now in their 20s and see how war could affect them personally. Gen Z and millennials are getting their news from social media, 86% and 84% respectively, with top sources being YouTube, Instagram, podcasts, TikTok, and X. They are not watching cable news anchors tell them what to think. They are scrolling through footage of a bombed girls' school in Minab and a flattened neighborhood in Tehran, and they are forming their own judgments. Gen Z doesn't support war in Iran because we know that this war isn't about protecting the peace, it is about personal interest, said Melina, 24, from New Jersey. The U.S. has always been involved in war because of personal interest. The protests erupted immediately. On March 7th, more than 50,000 people joined protests in London against the strikes. Hundreds of demonstrators quickly mobilized in Seattle, and as the march coursed through downtown, it was met with approval by thousands of shoppers who don't want another war. In New York, people attended a No More War protest at a military recruiting station in Times Square. And the polls confirm what the streets are showing. Americans say 59% to 38% that the U.S. made the wrong decision in using military force in Iran, according to Pew Research. In a Quinnipiac University poll, registered voters opposed the U.S. military action against Iran 54% to 39%. This is not a fringe anti-war movement. This is the majority of the country. And while the bombs fall and the protests rage, there is a diplomatic track that keeps flickering, sometimes alive, sometimes seemingly dead. The United States developed a 15-point proposal aimed at ending the war. The proposal offered sanctions relief to Iran in return for the removal of all its enriched uranium and other U.S. demands. A high-ranking diplomatic source confirmed that Iran received the plan but described it as extremely maximalist and unreasonable. Iran instead issued its own 5-point ceasefire proposal calling for war reparations and sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the U.S. expects its war against Iran to conclude in a matter of weeks, not months. But Trump himself says the war is not finished yet. And the U.S. has another 3,554 targets left to hit. Which is it? The mixed messaging is not just confusing to journalists. It is destabilizing every market on the planet. Now let's address the question that every investor is asking, where do I put my money? The answer from this conflict has been genuinely shocking. Since Trump joined Israel's war with Iran on February 28th, Bitcoin has rallied 8%, while gold has fallen 18%. That inverts everything conventional wisdom has told us for decades. Gold initially rose from $5,296 to $5,423 per troy ounce after the strikes, but a sell-off saw prices fall more than 6%. The traditional safe haven asset has dropped every week since the war began as the U.S. dollar gained ground. At the onset of a black swan event, fear-filled investors often duck for cover, and the traditional asset for doing so is not gold, but U.S. dollars. Meanwhile, Bitcoin fell to as low as $63,000 in the early days, but has since held above $70,000. Bank forecasts remain bullish on gold long-term. J.P. Morgan predicts prices will reach $6,300 per ounce by end of 2026, while Deutsche Bank is standing by a $6,000 year-end target. The takeaway for the average person is uncomfortable in its honesty. There is no perfect hiding place when the world is on fire. The only certainty is uncertainty itself. And beneath all of this, the oil prices, the protests, the missiles, the markets, there is a debate that America desperately needs to have with itself. Trump administration officials have offered diverse explanations for starting the war: to preempt Iranian retaliation, to ward off an imminent threat, to destroy Iran's military capabilities, to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, to secure Iran's natural resources, and to achieve regime change. But Iranian and U.S. officials rejected claims that Iran had been preparing an attack. The IAEA said there was no evidence of a structured nuclear weapons program at the time of the strikes, and a diplomatic breakthrough had been reached just days before the bombs started falling. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps turned back 3 ships trying to transit the Strait of Hormuz, demonstrating that safe passage could not be guaranteed. Bloomberg reported that the U.S. administration is examining how a potential $200 oil price would impact the U.S. economy. The conflict underscores a sanctions trilemma, penalizing 3 major oil producers, Iran, Venezuela, and Russia, simultaneously during an energy shock is a volatile gamble. Russia is an immediate winner. Higher oil prices mean higher revenues for the Kremlin, and tighter LNG markets increase the relative value of its pipeline gas. So here we are, day 28 of a war that was supposed to be over in weeks. Gas is through the roof. Groceries are climbing. The housing market is freezing. The Strait of Hormuz, a waterway most Americans couldn't find on a map a month ago, is now the most consequential choke point in the global economy. Over 50,000 people are marching in London. Young Americans are chanting in Times Square. The majority of the country says this was the wrong decision. Gold is crashing. Bitcoin is surging. Iran is rejecting peace plans. The president says talks are going great. Iran's foreign minister says no talks are happening. Trump has delayed attacks on energy facilities by 10 days, claiming talks are going well. Though Iran disagrees, and in the middle of all of this, in between the missile launches and the diplomatic cables and the oil futures, there is you, the person filling up your car, the person trying to figure out if you can still afford the apartment you're renting, the person scrolling through the news at midnight wondering if this is what 2003 felt like, or 1973, or if this is something entirely new and entirely worse. Here's what I believe with absolute certainty. This war is not abstract. It is not geopolitical theater for policy wonks to debate on Sunday morning shows. It is the single most consequential event shaping the American economy in 2026, and it is reaching into your life whether you invited it or not. The price of inattention is paid in dollars, at the pump, at the register, in the value of your home, in the interest rate on your student loans. The price of silence is paid in something worse. The questions that remain are stark. Will the 15-point plan lead to genuine negotiation, or is it designed to be rejected? Can the Strait of Hormuz reopen before global oil reserves are exhausted? Will this war tip the U.S. economy into recession? And for an entire generation of young Americans who are watching the same carnage on the same screens as young Iranians, will this be the conflict that defines their relationship with their own government forever? The answers are not written yet, but the cost at the pump, in your portfolio, and in the moral standing of a nation, that cost is already being tallied line by line, gallon by gallon, life by life. Stay informed, stay angry if you need to be, and understand that the greatest lie anyone can tell you right now is that this war doesn't affect you. It already has,